It is already February 2025, and these last couple weeks have been pretty wild. From the California wildfires to constant power outages, we've been handling it pretty well, and it seems like things are finally going back to normal. And so now that things are a little bit back to normal, I'm trying to get back into my flow of things, look at the projects that I've done over the course of years. And one project that I always look at is my Outlook add-in Python Flask add-in project, whatever. So I made this project about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was to serve a purpose that I had saw when I was creating my own Outlook and Office add-ins. I had built out Outlook applications using the VSTO method and having to use C# with Visual Studio. And although it was very robust, I was able to do a lot of things with it. It wasn't my favorite thing. Python is a lot easier to use than C#. Even though I'm fine with both languages, if you gave me a choice, I'd probably go with Python first, as I can kind of do things a little bit faster. And so when I found out that there was another concept of being able to make an Outlook application, I started looking down that road. And so the way you would build out an Office or Outlook application is that you would create a web server or a website and then have a manifest file that is able to dictate how that web app works inside of an Office add-in, right? So it's kind of cool because you can make a web application that's used for the actual internet or used for actual browsing, and then that still be able to be also used in an Office application, right? And there's a bunch of different possibilities that you can do there with their Office JavaScript for interoperability as far as using APIs with the Office products that you have the add-in with. So it's a pretty cool idea and concept, but at the time I had never created something like that. I did create multiple different web applications before, but I really didn't understand at least how to be able to do the deployment side of this to kind of get this to work. And so I really wasn't sure. So I figured I'm going to go ahead and look through Microsoft's documentation. And for creating Office add-ins, they had many different examples. Of course, .NET, because they're Microsoft, right? But then they also had a Node example as well. But one thing they really didn't have an example of is Python, right? And so for me, I figured that was weird because they actually had other examples of using or creating a Flask app in an app service in Azure, and it comes with a whole hello world and everything, right? So it was a weird concept that they would have something for Python for creating a web app in Azure, but not for creating an Office add-in, which was like kind of a weird thing for me. So I figured, why don't I just create it myself? I mean, like, I know what the underlying concept is for the most part. So if I can get away with at least creating out a Flask web app, and I'm able to tie the manifest XML file to the right web server, and then I'm able to specify what it's supposed to do, then everything should kind of work out the same. It won't be Node, but I'll handle that if something happens or I need Node for some reason, which I didn't, because at the end of the day, Node, just like Flask, just like Django, just like .NET, are all just ways that you can have a web server that can interact with your front end, whether or not it's going to be reactive, whether or not it's going to have HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that's just server-side rendered. It all kind of depends, and as long as it comes out with a web link and you have a web server and a URL, you should be fine, it seems like. So I built this first iteration out, and I let people know on Reddit. I let like communities know of it, and it comes with some pretty good reception, which is kind of odd because at that time, I would have assumed that everyone would have been like, well, you didn't do it right. Like I usually expect those type of things. But no, this time I actually got a lot of positive things back from it, and it kind of invigorated me to kind of work on other projects. Over time, I continued to kind of build on this project and build on some of the flaws that this project had comparatively to just using something with Node. One of the flaws is that with using Outlook, you need to be using HTTPS, and this is difficult when you want to do local testing. So for Node, if you're building out an Outlook add-in, it comes with these dev certs that basically give you self-signed certs that Outlook is good with. And so you could use that for doing local testing when you're dealing with Node. The Python version originally didn't have that. And so I think about a year or two ago, added to the project that ability so that when you first run in dev mode, it will automatically try to generate out those certs so that you can use HTTPS. Before that, I would try to have people use something like Nagrok to use HTTPS, so that therefore Outlook wouldn't complain that you're using HTTP. And then I think I had also tried just building out my own self-certs and then trying that against Flask, but Outlook didn't like that. So specifically using those Office add-in dev certs and running through that flow process actually makes Outlook fine, and you could do your local testing, which saves a ton of time, and you don't have to therefore keep updating, you know, your manifest of X, Y, and Z with the new Nagrok URL every single time, right? So that's pretty helpful. And I also tried helping out with some of the instructions on how to even add in the manifest file, because unlike other Office products, it's not as easy to be able to upload out your manifest file to your Outlook application. You actually have to go somewhere specific, whether or not you're an admin or you're a normal user, right? So if you're like a normal user, you actually have to go into your Outlook in a specific location. I usually go straight through a URL that I actually saved on GitHub, so you can go straight there, but you have to go into your Outlook on the web and then be able to import in your manifest file from there. If you're an admin, you can actually go into like Admin Center Microsoft and go through the steps of importing it from there so that everyone in your whole organization can be able to have that manifest file. But if you're doing local testing, this is where things kind of differ, right? There's no real quick way, not that I know of, to be able to just keep updating your manifest file and it just show up on Outlook, right? So for example, if you wanted to test something and then you wanted to therefore see it in Outlook, you're gonna have to basically keep that web page open so that you can get rid of the old manifest file, import in the new manifest file that you changed like whatever inside, and then wait for that to basically permeate through. Once you actually see it in your Outlook, then you can see if there was any difference. If therefore it didn't work, you're gonna have to try again. So it is a little bit repetitious of how to do that, and I haven't found a way to be able to work around that, even if you're using Node. But if I do, I'll probably add that to the project as well. And so that's kind of what this main project is in particular. And one other last thing that I wanted to discuss was the deployment side of this. At first, this was a little bit weird because it's not really a concept of Office add-ins or Outlook add-ins, but rather deploying out your web application so that you can have a URL for the manifest file. That's essentially what's important, and certain things kind of can get more complicated from that scenario, right? So like if you're just deploying to Azure, Fly.io, PlanetScale, you know, Vercel or whatever, that's not necessarily a big deal, right? You know, once you are able to deploy your app, whether it's .NET, whether it's whatever, just as long as you have basically that Office JavaScript that is able to be run at the beginning with its onReady method, and then from there you have your manifest set up. If you have all of those things done, you should be good to go. However, it will become a lot more complicated, for example, if this is an internal application for a company, right? Or for a client or something, right? So for example, I would build out Office applications that actually had to be locked down so that if you went through the web app, it's going to bring up Microsoft authentication, right? But if you also went through Outlook, it's also going to verify that you have access to the application. And so that causes a bunch of different things now that add and compound onto it. So you can see how those possibilities are going to be more endless, because now you're going to need to deal with the IMSOL library or the Microsoft authentication library. You're going to create app registrations so that you can be able to handle out this OAuth and communication between like logging in with Microsoft on your web application or in the Outlook Office add-in side. And you have to also write in custom code that can basically know whether or not you're in the Office add-in or in the browser to be able to then verify if the person is authenticated or not. So you can see how this balloons into a lot of different complexities, right? But just taking a step back, trying out my repo that I have on GitHub and just kind of getting your foot wet into this whole thing is basically how you're going to get started, right? Just try out the repo, download it, be able to run through the instructions, and you can even test out your own web application. This is just good if you like Flask, right? So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did like the video, leave a thumbs up. If you want to discuss or you have any comments or concerns, please leave them in the comments below. And if you like my content, please subscribe. I would love to have you guys along. Other than that, I hope the rest of your day goes well. Peace, everyone.